I want to invite our close friend, Reverend Dr. Johnny Carley. She is an NGO representative to the United Nations at Cosmos Journal, USA. She is the author of The Alchemy of Power, applies her expertise in values-driven leadership and cultural development in the private sector and at the United Nations, where her activities include Vice Chair of the Cluster for Global Citizenship, UN Committee on Religious NGOs, UN 2020, United Religious Initiative, UN Circle, and advisor and senior fellow at Nonviolence International, New York. Reverend Dr. Johnny Carley, floor is for you. Thank you.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here. I'm here to talk about consciousness. Krishna says that water cannot wet it, wind cannot dry it, weapons cannot shatter it, fire cannot burn it. It's ancient, it's unborn, and it's not subject to death. Consciousness is a subtle body of information and also a subtle body of energy that we sense from the inside, but it's not localized in our physical bodies. Excuse me. We experience consciousness as an inner domain of reality, but consciousness is determinant of every outer reality we encounter. We can't see it, but without consciousness, there's no seeing. Consciousness is the primal generator as well as the ultimate interpreter of our reality. It's both the alpha and the omega. Without consciousness, we would have no imagination, no creativity, no insight, no intuition, and we wouldn't be able to make choices. And contrary to a lot of assumptions, consciousness does not occur in our minds. We experience it when we settle into our being, which is what yoga helps us do, if yoga is practiced with consciousness. There are so many people, especially here in the US, who are calling themselves yoga teachers, who are really just teaching stretch classes because they themselves haven't developed a yogic consciousness. Authentic yoga practice is a really important and a powerful means of accessing and navigating our consciousness. And the reason that consciousness is so important is because it's fundamental. Consciousness is root causal. Matter is derived from consciousness always. Consciousness occurs in the metaphysical domain, and metaphysics is the science and the philosophy of causality. In other words, metaphysics is the study of what causes what. And both science and philosophy tell us that consciousness is a generative power, and it also determines our experiences. So you could say that consciousness is like an engine of causality. In other words, you could say that consciousness is the catalyst for everything, everywhere. As our consciousness goes, so goes the world. The domain of consciousness is where we generate peacefulness, where we actually sense ourselves as content, and where we experience the phenomenon of unity with one another. And the nature of consciousness is that it's always expanding. Our yearnings are limitless. We're always eternally reaching for something more, something more. And right now, it's dawning on people all over the world that reaching for more physical things is just not the best game plan for us. What we're witnessing right now is an emergent global reaching for a new paradigm where every sentient being gets to live life fully with the common right to an internal and to external peace. The global consciousness that's emerging right now may well be the beginning of a new paradigm, a new way of being, a new normal, a fundamental new ground of consciousness may well be emerging as we speak. Now, it's important to remember that consciousness is an intelligence that lies beyond thought processes. It's not an intellectual point of view, it's a transcendent point of view. Consciousness is actually where we imagine how we're going to manifest a new global order. And it's where our resolve is for making that new world order happen. It's where our imaginations transcend reasonableness. Because if we were reasonable, we wouldn't be able to dream ourselves forward into a just and compassionate world. There's no reason to believe that. But in our consciousness, we can transcend that reasonableness and know deeply that we can and will create a just and compassionate world. Vedic theory says consciousness is a process of evolution that's driven by a collective urge to evolve into higher understanding. And what we're seeing is a global convergence toward a mass expansion of consciousness as we're beginning to understand ourselves as one global community that is interdependently co-arising. I call that global citizenship consciousness, that sense that knowing, that deep knowing that we are interdependently co-arising. The extent to which we evolve that kind of unity consciousness is the extent to which we'll be able to unify our physical world. You know, even though consciousness is absolutely the most critical component for how we evolve, we almost never, ever account for it. And to ignore consciousness is to ignore the primordial power that not only drives our ever-evolving quest for expansion, it actually determines the nature of our expansion. We know that 95% of reality can't be accessed with our physical senses. And our consciousness may or may not give us access to all the rest of the 95%. But one of the reasons that the old paradigm is crumbling so horrifically in places is that it only factors in the 5% of our reality that we can access with our 5 senses. And if we are going to evolve to another state, we have got to expand into that other 95%. And consciousness is the only route we really know about right now to do that. Only history will really be able to tell us, but we certainly may well be on the cusp of an evolutionary leap in consciousness. If we more accurately account for the profound impact that consciousness has on outcomes, we're a lot more likely to make a positive evolutionary leap. And we can begin with recognizing that all social dysfunctions are first and foremost a crisis of consciousness. In order to anchor any evolutionary leaping that we might make, we have to give consciousness a much more accurate place in our social consciousness. We have to establish its place in every social equation. We think of consciousness as the kind of fluffy stuff that's aside from getting the work done. But that's really delusional because it has to happen in consciousness first. The more accurately we factor in the fact that consciousness is a determining factor of the human experience, the more likely we're going to be able to get to where we want to be. Consciousness determines the human experience, whether we're on a yoga mat, whether we're in a refugee camp, whether we're in a mansion, or whether we're at the United States, and whether we're at the United Nations. We have to begin to account for consciousness. And that first and foremost means being aware of it in ourselves, being aware of it, how it's playing out collectively. And so I'd like to close with an experiment in unity consciousness with just breathing with each other. So settle in and take a breath with me. Breathing in, recognizing our deep sense within, the consciousness that lies deep within us. Breathing in again and recognizing the consciousness that we are collectively part of, feeling at one with each other. Knowing that this is a breath going around the world, uniting us in consciousness, uniting us in the knowing of our connectivity. And that is a deep, deep blessing. For that, I am forever grateful, and I say, Namaste. Thank you.